Hello, everyone. This is a Donoram monologue podcast. I am, as always, your host, Beau. And today we'll be talking about video games like we always are. And but first, before we talk about video games, I want to talk a little bit about nursing. Our sponsor, Ashley Luann K. You can find her on Instagram. We will provide a link to that. And again, she provides information cradle to grave on nursing. There's information about the education. There's information about what you'll be doing as a nurse when you're working as a nurse, and lifestyle too, which I think is my wife's been a nurse for 5 years, and she finds that aspect of it the most interesting. So please check out Ashley Luann K on Instagram. Links in the description of this video or podcast, whichever one you're listening to. And so we're coming to the point where I'm gonna have to start playing more video games to do these monologues. So let's see here. Oh, I should have looked this up before I started this. I apologize, people. I know that your time is precious, and I don't want to waste any. It looks like on May 31st, a very special episode of Xenogears will come out. It is our final episode of Xenogears, and I've challenged our listeners: 1,000 likes on that. Oh, wait, we should specify 1,000 downloads or 1,000 likes. 1,000 downloads on the podcast. 1,000 downloads on the podcast. I will quit my job. I will walk up to my boss. Or 1,000 likes on YouTube. Hang on. 1,000 likes on YouTube or 1,000 downloads on the podcast. I will quit my job. I will walk up to my boss at the place of my gainful employment. I will tell him that I will no longer work there, and I will stream Xenosaga 1, 2, and 3 for you guys. I will do that. And a lot of you are saying, Beau, why should I bother to download something just so you can do this? That doesn't sound like it's going to pay off. It costs you nothing to like a video. It costs you nothing to download a podcast. So hopefully that's something you want to see. And honestly, guys, I would really like to do it. So May 31st, Sunday, May 31st, the Indy's not running. Indy 500's not running. So you got nothing better to do. Please download that. I will quit my job, and you know what? Maybe you're lay epic troll from the old 4chan days, and you like to harm people. My wife will leave me if I quit my job, so that fuels your fire. That'll get you to. And if you're the kind of guy like, I don't want to ruin Beau's marriage, don't worry, we'll work it out. But please do it. Now, if we get 1,000 downloads and 1,000 likes on YouTube for the May 31st episode of Donoram, the finale of Xenogears, not only will I quit my job and play Xenogears 1, 2, and 3, I will play Xenogears 1, 2, and 3 in complete cosplay. If we get 1,000 likes on the video and 1,000 downloads on the podcast for that specific one, I will be in complete cosplay. And who will I be cosplaying? YouTube, that's up to you. So, please not Zero Suit Samus. So now it's going to be Zero Suit Samus. Oh boy. Guys, anyway, I have to play more video games. I'm running out of things to talk about. So let's talk about the past. Adam's constantly pestering me to come up with new subjects to do for the monologues here. And I got to admit, I'm kind of running dry. But one thing I thought of was console wars. Console wars is kind of a dead concept. Of course, people argue on Reddit and 4chan who's winning, but it's almost irrelevant because exclusivity on games is almost non-existent nowadays. People who own a PlayStation 4 and an Xbox One, when they argue, it sounds silly. I mean, it really just does. But it didn't always. And the fourth generation consoles actually birthed the console war. Not a lot of people remember, a lot of people remember that were alive for it. The 90s, the great war between the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And today I just want to tell you which one was my favorite of the two and defend that position. I'll also tell you which one I think objectively was better. But doing one, by the way, the reason we're not doing Generation 1 through 3 is because that's silly. Generation 1, obviously the Odyssey. Generation 2, obviously the Atari 2600. And Generation 3, far and away the Nintendo Entertainment System. In fact, video games during Generation 3 were Nintendo. If you were talking about video games, you were talking about Nintendo, plain and simple. I don't know anyone that actually owned a Sega Master System. No one. Don, did you ever know someone that owned a Sega Master System? They shut up, Adam. So fourth generation. There was a lot of games. You had the TurboGrafx 16, I'm sure, but again, I don't know anyone that actually knew one. Did your friend own one of those? A TurboGrafx? No, yeah, I didn't think so. But Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. These were the two heavyweights going at each other at the time. I personally owned a Sega Genesis because I loved and still love Sonic the Hedgehog. Absolutely one of my favorite game series of all time. So that's why I personally owned one of those. Most of my friends had a Super Nintendo, though. And, of course, the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat was the one that had blood. So, funny story, I'm sure I've told you guys before. My mother didn't know if she wanted us to play Mortal Kombat or not because it was all over the news. It was sort of a big deal back in the 90s. And we told her that it was okay because the Genesis version didn't have blood. Of course, it had tons of blood. So we told her the Super Nintendo version had one. But anyway, my personal favorite was the Genesis. I feel like the Genesis was the one that took risks. And if you've noticed a pattern in the games I like, if you've noticed a pattern in the games that we like collectively as Donoram, it's the ones that are willing to take risk and be different than what everyone else is doing. And the Genesis had more of that, I feel, than the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo had a lot of tried and true and did it incredibly. But the Genesis, I think, took more risks, and their games had a lot more personality. And the Genesis kind of had, in the 90s, what Nintendo has now, and that is its first party that makes it great. Third party was what made the Super Nintendo great. And, of course, Nintendo's first party was still killing it, but their third party was absolutely incredible. And Genesis didn't really have that. There wasn't a whole lot of third-party games on the Genesis that just struck out and were awesome, but first-party games are absolutely incredible. You had the Phantasy Stars, which are still some of the best JRPGs in the 90s. You had Sonic the Hedgehog, which was just a very clever take on the platformer, very different platformer for the time. It was a ton of fun. Of course, you may have listened to my monologue about the memory of me taking my first communion money and spending it on a Sega Genesis. So yeah, that was my favorite. But if I'm being honest with you, objectively speaking, the Super Nintendo was the better system. And I think it's more important to explore that than it is for me to tell you why the Genesis was my favorite, because of course, I've always felt that explaining why you love a video game can be a lot like explaining why you like a type of food. If someone asks you why you like steak so much, there you go, explain that. You can't. You just like it. It's kind of the way it is with video games, in my opinion. But objectively speaking, the Super Nintendo was the best one. It had greater graphics capabilities. The sound was incredible on a Super Nintendo compared to a Genesis. I don't think anyone will ever even attempt to argue that. And while the Super Nintendo didn't take as many risks, I think it showed us the future better. An excellent example of this is Final Fantasy VI, released in North America as Final Fantasy III. This game invented what we know as the JRPG today. Xenogears, Final Fantasy VII, all these JRPGs that really took deep, mature stories and told them through the, that's weak. Because of where it is, you only got one coin. That's weak. Adam's playing Animal Crossing. But that Final Fantasy VI is directly responsible for that. That was when, of course, it was the first Final Fantasy game not directed by Hironobu Sakaguchi. And man, they went to town. I mean, they just absolutely. And of course, it featured two characters designed by the legendary Tetsuya Nomura. Shadow and Setzer were designed by him. Very, very iconic for him too. Shadow, a ninja who with a dark past, and Setzer, a gambler who's betting borderlines on self-harm. So there's that. Super Mario World, man, I don't think we understand how big of a leap Super Mario World was. You had a world map, you saved your game, tons of secrets. To this day, I still find people tell me about secrets on Super Mario World because I've never read anything about the game. I've always just played it. And The Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past, still my favorite Zelda game of all time. I like it better than Ocarina. Most people think that's insane, but I actually do like it better than Ocarina. It was the last top-down view Zelda game that we had. Well, no, that's not true. We had Link's Awakening on the Game Boy after that, but it was the last one on a major console until much later. And man, it's like the most Zelda one ever to me. The Dark World, the world before it just stuff like that. The Super Nintendo revolutionized and not really because of it was the Super Nintendo. It just happened to have games that revolutionized the way we told stories with video games. Mother 2, Earthbound in America. That was another game that, in fact, Earthbound, I didn't know this, but Matt Stone and Trey Parker, who created South Park, cite Earthbound as an inspiration, as it involved children going on adventures that children have absolutely no business going on, and wacky adventures. And that would show up later in South Park, The Stick of Truth video game, where they told Obsidian, when Obsidian began working on it, they told them that that was one of their favorite video games of all time. And that's, I think the Super Nintendo just told us about the future more than the Sega Genesis did. I think the Sega Genesis was locked in making what was better, whereas the Super Nintendo was like, we're willing to look to the future. And again, I know that sounds like I'm contradicting myself what I said earlier about how the Genesis took more risk. The Genesis did take more risk. There was a lot more weird games on the Genesis. But again, from the aspect of storytelling, they were just trying to improve on what was already done, whereas the Super Nintendo guys were absolutely making operas for the Super Nintendo. The Castlevania games that came out for the Super Nintendo were a lot deeper and a lot just the music in Super Castlevania 4 might be the best video game music of all time. But so that's anyway. We'll be going over the 5th generation next, and that will be an argument between the Nintendo 64 and the Sony PlayStation. And honestly, that one really boils down to all of these actually kind of boil down to what you owned with most people. No one's really willing to be objective with it, but that's where I'm willing to go for Donoram. I'm willing to be objective with it. So that's that. I think my favorite was the Sega Genesis. And let me end with this. I'll give you guys a couple games you should play on each system. For the Sega Genesis, check out Phantasy Star 4 Into the Millennium. Check out Beyond Oasis. Beyond Oasis is really cool. It was a Zelda clone, but it has an Arabian theme to it. And I am a sucker for anything that takes a genre of video game and subverts the medieval Europe setting. I love it. I think that's just the coolest thing in the world to just put it in a different setting. That was the main thing that drew me to Jade Empire when it came out. It was an RPG not set in a medieval Europe polytheistic setting. So Beyond Oasis, absolutely cool. The challenge is very, very present in that game. I will warn you. Phantasy Star 4 Into the Millennium, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Eternal Champions. It's kind of a weird fighting game there. And for Super Nintendo, Super Castlevania 4. Absolutely a classic. The challenge, very real in that one. Final Fantasy 6 or 3 if you're playing the original North American version. Everyone will gripe about the translation that was done on that. Lay off them. It was 1994, and video games are still marketed to children before anyone else. Give them a break. You got all the cussing you can handle in Final Fantasy 7, so I don't know what you're worried about. And another absolute classic for the Super Nintendo was Mega Man X. Absolutely a classic. Don and I did a really cool LP of that. That was about a year ago, wasn't it, Don? Yeah, right about a year ago. That was really fun. So, guys, tune in sometime later, and we'll discuss the 5th generation of video games, the Nintendo 64 versus the Sony PlayStation, because of course the Sega really didn't have a dog in that. The Sega Saturn really didn't have a dog in that fight. So like, share, subscribe. Again, more importantly, I want to plug the May 31st episode of Xenogears, the finale, the thrilling conclusion to the Xenogears saga. You don't want to miss what happens at the end of Faye and Ellie's adventures. And we do want to give a hearty I don't even know what to call it. Shout. I hate that term. But yes, we're giving a shout out, bro. Spring break, 1999, I guess. But we do want to mention Keegan, our buddy in the Rally Networks, which we are a member of. Keegan does an excellent podcast known as Framework of Tomorrow. I promise you that Keegan does not have a Spring Break 1999 theme to his show. He discusses patterns, symbols, and observations of the past and applies them to where we may go in the future based on those. Very interesting, very intellectual. You'll really enjoy it if you listen to it. I enjoy it. It's one of the ones I enjoy the most listening to in the Rally Network. So, guys, again, 1,000 likes and 1,000 downloads on the May 31st episode of Xenogears. And I will play 1 through 3, or if you do both, I will play 1 through 3 of Xenosaga in cosplay. Thank you very much.